So Animation UK, the voice of the animation industry, part of the UK Screen Alliance. So we are the trade body that represents the VFX companies, the post-production companies, animation studios, distributors, service providers, and film studios. So we are all about business. I mean, as a trade body, as the voice of the animation industry, we're all about creating the right climate for growth. And we are really clear that what we need to do is create also the right metrics so that we can measure that, because you can't, you can't make the arguments if you can't measure the problem and also the improvement. So we've produced a series of reports. Earlier this year, a report called We Need to Talk About Skills because of the skills crisis. And I've been absolutely staggered to hear from my members just how skills and talent is the #1 issue for their businesses. It's a critical issue that we have the right pipeline of skills and talent coming into the industry, not least because we have 30% of our workforce from outside the UK. But and I'm really going fast here, because we stand between you and the drinks. So it's also really important that we have the right workforce, that we have a workforce that represents the full breadth of where we can recruit from and who we're speaking to in terms of our audience. So in September, we produced this report, VFX, Animation and Post-Production, Inclusion and Diversity in the UK. We did this for a couple of reasons. One, we thought maybe there was a difference in the workforce in our industries as opposed to the wider film and TV industry, which we're wrapped into sometimes. And two, we wanted to take a look at what we needed to do, what we needed to address. And so the report's good news and bad news. And it's really interesting, and it's jam-packed full of really forensic detail. And it was an excellent survey with a really good response carried out. I can say that without any blushes, because it was my colleague Neil Hatton and partners in the industry who really pushed this forward. Tom Box, I'm nodding at there in acknowledgement of his role. So here are some of the headlines. Gender. Right. So in theory, we're doing okay on gender. We've tipped the balance. We're now roughly 50% of the workforce. So that's the good news. And there's lots of more detail behind all of these if you want to really check out women in different roles in the animation industry and what they're doing, creative versus management leadership, etc., etc. All of that is in the full report. But just to say that the slightly not so good news is the next slide, which is in animation, 66% of our women are in junior roles. Now that cuts across production, creative, administrative or management. So yeah, we're getting there, but we're not getting right up that ladder. I know you're going to hear from other panelists who will talk about what they're doing about that. I'm skipping over a lot of slides that are about the makeup of our sector and where we draw our people from and the link to diversity and immigration. Of course, that's a huge issue that we're doing masses about and lobbying around. But I'm just going to slip now right down the slide deck to look at the BAME statistics, so statistics and data on ethnicity in our workforce. And every time I'm using comparators against post-production and VFX, just so you can see. So here you'll see animation comprises 14 BAME workforce representatives who declare themselves as BAME comprise only 14% of the workforce, which is not good when you compare that statistic to the working population we tend to draw our workforce from when they're UK. So London, Manchester, Bristol, these are cities which have a far greater and richer mix of a diverse workforce to draw from. And I'm going to finally, penultimately, just touch on class, because it's something that when we talk about diversity, we don't talk enough about. And there are very few measures for how you can measure diversity of class in workforce. And some of them are about what your parents did when you were 14, and that's the official indicator, I'm sure many of you know, for class, but so is education. So most of our workforce has had a free secondary education, but quite a big percentage of them come from selective secondary schools, and more than average are fee-paying students at secondary education. And then if you think about higher education as not being now, it's obviously mass higher education in lots of ways. Well over 50% of the workforce, of the young people go on to higher education, but they have to pay, they have to take out loans, and they increasingly struggle for that. Well, the next slide, I think, will show that 92%, animation is the most, oh, I haven't shown that one. Animation is one of the most qualified sectors of the creative industries. In fact, I think it's the most qualified. So 92% of our workforce hold a first degree. So here's the scorecard. This is a bit reductive and a bit basic in some ways. But so we're getting there with gender balance. We need to do, but not in terms of seniority. We need to do far more about BAME, and we definitely need to see that as a business issue. And there's other diversity issues there that are in the report that you will find fascinating when you read it, and I'm very happy to direct you to our website for more information. So that's the situation in figures, but now you're going to hear much more about the actual colour of our sector from the panellists who are working on this agenda very hard and succeeding.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you very much. So let's get down to brass tacks. If you're putting a production together and you're applying for grants, in particular for the Young Audience Content Fund, Harriet is here to tell us. Harriet runs the, you run the development part.
Well,
you're the development executive for the fund, but you're across the fund in all its detail. And so why is it actually not just good for business, but essential for business?
Yes. So we get quite a lot of questions about our diversity standards, and they are a requirement for our fund. But I'll talk a bit about where they've come from first. So the goal of them and what they're really about is just trying to create rich and representative content. And they're more than just a set of standards that we use, but they're also a tool for industry. So, for example, they're also used as a requirement for certain BAFTA and BIFA awards. And so they're originally created for film, and now they've been adapted for television, and they're being piloted for TV through the Young Audiences Content Fund. And we're aware that broadcasters have their own set of standards, and these are designed to work in partnership with those standards and be complementary to them and not some additional onerous task. And then to get into the detail, so the underrepresented groups we're focusing on mainly come from the protected characteristics from the UK Equality Act. However, the BFI recognise sort of where the industry is right now, and that it's quite white middle class and London and South East centric. So to address that, we have additional criteria which covers regional representation, socio-economic background, and also caring responsibilities. And they're actually really flexible in how you can meet these standards. So there are 4 standards you can choose from. You only have to meet 1 of them for development and only 2 for production. And under each standard, there's a whole set of sub-criteria on how you can meet each standard. And I'd say it's not about ticking boxes, it's about sort of instigating conversations and really interrogating producers' decision processes. So before you start assigning gender or race to characters, or you start crewing up, it's sort of like a framework by which to look at your production. And the website's there on the bottom, and I'd say, that has a whole list of resources on how you can help meet the standards. And also the team are always available at the other end of the phone, and they're really helpful in, supporting you in achieving your ambitions, and also stress testing the ways in which you intend to meet those criteria as well. So yeah, really flexible. And you know, if you feel you've got a project that's addressing underrepresentation in ways that's not listed in those standards, we'd be very happy to talk about it, and it may be that you can meet the standards in another way not already outlined there.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you very much. I'm going to move swiftly on because I'm going to try to leave time for a sort of general conversation at the end. Katie, we've seen the stats for gender representation in the industry, and they're looking okay. They're looking good now. And you, of course, come from a company which is now run entirely by women.
Certainly is in Manchester,
senior team, yeah. So give us some thoughts about that and about how the company operates. So we're talking about a pretty big company across your various sites around the world, and how you operate and what you put in place to ensure certain levels of representation within the company itself.
Yeah. Okay, so the Manchester studio for Brown Bag Films is run by 3 women. Is 3 senior level women, and I know Kate obviously mentioned that at the moment that's where there's a bit of disparity as far as gender is concerned, but yeah, our studio director, our technical director, and also our senior producer are all women. One from the UK, one from New Zealand, and one from India. So we are quite diverse at the very top end of the scale in our Manchester studio. Something that we are quite proud about is the fact that we are quite diverse, not just as far as gender is concerned, but across the nationalities that we also bring into the business. So we have 28 different nationalities across 132 staff, I think we are currently at the moment. And one of the things that we really focus on to make sure that we're selecting people from a wide and diverse background is training in unconscious bias. So there we go, tackling unconscious bias. It's one of the things, I work in L&D, I should say, so I head up learning and development within the Manchester studio, and we have a whole array of programmes to support our leaders as well as our general workforce as well in understanding the effects that bias can have, and that starts right at selection. So I deliver unconscious bias training so that people can understand that actually if you are recruiting people like you are effectively stifling your own workforce and your own creativity, and actually you're only producing content which is going to appeal to people like you when it goes out, obviously out on the screens. So that's something that we look for. We train that on selection, but also when we're talking about progression within the workplace as well. So all of our managers are actually trained on how to not continuously favour certain people within the teams who may be high performers, but they may be high performers because they're always being given the opportunity to be high performers, and that there are other people who would be just as capable who potentially aren't being given those opportunities. And what we ask our managers to do is reflect and see whether they're making these judgments and they're making these assessments based on biases rather than on, you know, specific performance standards. So that's one of the things that we look on. The reason for that is because 99.9999996% of the decisions that every single one of us make, you, me, everyone, is actually unconscious. So your brain can actually only manage 40 bits of information out of the 11 million bits of information that you get given or you take in every second. So that's actually how much of your consciousness is made without you even knowing about it. So you can imagine if you actually step back and thought about every decision that you make, and I'm going to challenge all of you to say where you sat today, even in this room, you made an unconsciously biased decision on the seat that you were going to sit in and the person that you were going to sit next to. You do it when you get on the tram or you get on the bus, and that is purely based on the base instincts of survival that we have developed over thousands of years, obviously. I'm going to sit next to that person because I don't feel like I need to run away from them, I'm not going to have to fight them, and actually I might want to mate with them. Wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but those are the base instincts. And actually, there you go. Who's Kate going to sit next to on the train? Exactly. So those are unconscious biases, and we're not even aware that we're doing that. So in our studio, we deliver specific training to overcome those unconscious biases. So here we go. I should have had better lenses on my glasses today. So we know teams, obviously, with more diverse talent actually make far more creative decisions, and the risk of you hiring people and promoting people who are all the same as yourself is going to stifle productivity and obviously innovation and development moving forward. And I think that's pretty much it. Oh, look, there's some stats from our Great Place to Work. So obviously our unconscious bias training and equality and diversity training within Brown Bag is working. Corporate social responsibility, our staff said 67%. Well, 67% of them said we were doing all right. Diversity, 84% said that we were doing incredibly well on that, and they felt we were doing well. 68% agreed that our culture encouraged collaboration. And teamwork, 72% said that we were forging productive alliances across our business and actually externally as well. And that's overcoming all equality and diversity. So the only thing I would say is I would encourage every studio to do something similar, and perhaps then it would be more industry-wide spread.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you very much. I'm now going to be in such a state when I get on the tram. I'm not just going to... Some people wanting to mate with me. We actually did unconscious bias workshops at last CMC in July. We did 2 one each afternoon, and they were popular, and I wouldn't say very popular, but people did attend, which I was pleased about. But they were, in our survey afterwards, they were very popular. They were, the people felt they were really getting something that was important for them. Greg, I want to move on now to depth.
Yes.
It just feels like a Philip Pullman novel, doesn't it? Depth.
Absolutely. Well, I think the depth of inclusivity is really, really important. Because it was interesting when we chatted the other day, good for business, ? I think if we're chasing inclusivity just to sell something or just to make a profit, rather than contributing to wider communal or cultural life, I think there's some real dangers in there. I think you look at, we obviously come after the back of the advertising kind of session, and you just look at various adverts out there, and you see them, and you just got to, you find yourself asking, are you chasing a customer, or do you genuinely believe in what you're doing? If you just kind of show kind of...
favorite place to sit wheneth the sky is blue.
And cut! That's a wrap! Me name's Bagger T. Bagger Trouble Double G. Can me audition for your new film, Ye Old Palm Tree? Oh, look, Bagger T, I don't think this film is right for you. Ye Old Palm Tree is based on an old play by Will-I Mouse DeBard. And it's not really suited to a freestyling rapper like you. But well, I might be looking for extras, though. Oh. What?
So there we go, Bagger T reduced to the role of extra, even though he is the world's expert on Will-I Mouse DeBard. I think it's interesting because, like, when we started, I think in broadcasting we rely on a lot of other businesses that cross our business to make it work. And certainly we know of supermarkets and a toy manufacturer that didn't like Bagger T at all, and they weren't comfortable about their shareholders being associated with a character like Bagger T. That's obviously kind of like 9 years ago. We've kind of moved on a little bit from then. But I think whilst broadcasters, I think there's a desire to make this work. I think because we're an industry that works across, that requires support from various other companies as you go through, what I would say is we found it very easy to kind of work on inclusivity within our own sphere, but then sometimes when relying on service companies or companies providing a service to us, that we've really kind of struggled to make it work. Obviously, as a company, we work across live action and animation, if you kind of click the slides on now. And I think what's interesting is Kate's report. I've kind of read it kind of cover to cover, and in many ways there's lots of encouraging things going on there. But unless we can actually shift the external perception of the industry, no matter what the figures are doing, if we can't shift that, then talent pipelines that we'll talk about again in a minute. If the talent pipelines aren't convinced you're an industry that I should be working in, then no matter how well we're doing with the numbers, then we're not necessarily going to be able to kind of help ourselves grow. And I think one thing, and this is and one reason to talk about, I think, perception is when we were kind of making Apple Tree House, mixed media, live action, I felt quite comfortable what we were achieving in the live action space. And then when I went onto the animation side, I felt we weren't doing as good a work as possible, just because of the complete difference with the short-term hires on the live action side. We were able to make big decisions and make huge kind of contributions to the whole team making the show. When you go into the service side of bringing in service animation, as a show, you don't feel able to kind of shift the dial as much, and in many ways, I think the service companies we're using actually had a good mix of crew, but I didn't feel we were able to kind of have the influence that we wanted to kind of grow that. I think if we just click onto the next little clip, I've just got one other clip here because I know not
everyone likes sports.
They do. Marley does, and so does Sam. Nadine, Zainab, Mum, and I even think Kobe. Everyone but me. Everyone is sports crazy. But why? All people do in sports is chase after balls, kick balls, throw balls, hit balls with sticks, and sometimes even bash each other really hard.
I am lost.
So I just kind of show that clip just for one tiny reason. I think over the course of 3 series, we I think did a great deal of good work to kind of get a sense of inclusivity right the way through our HODs and right the way through the company. It's really important as a producer that you get the support of HODs to do that. And I think one thing was really interesting about just this one particular shot that I was thinking of the other day. When we started on the process, I think the animators would have had an all-male, all-white football team in there. And I think 6 months later, just by constantly saying we shouldn't be even having to discuss, and basically that was the first design on those characters. I think at the beginning of series 2, where you weren't questioning. That's essentially a background asset. It's got nothing to do with the foreground of the show, but the animators come up with that piece of artwork without anybody having to kind of question about what you're trying to do in terms of the small kind of minutiae that you just want it to be. And I think that shot was kind of a great example of that. And I think my final point is, and this comes back to good for business ? I think there's a lot of good work going on, but I think until companies at a shareholding and at a board level and at a management and at an ownership level reflect the diversity, that then there's a danger that the diversity is just there supporting companies whose ownership doesn't necessarily have the diversity and inclusivity that you would want at ownership and control level. And I think it's really important that as we build structures going forward, that you get that sense. It's the only way that the truly brilliant, inclusive and diverse ideas will find their way in a business market as well.
And I guess that would include investors as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting there because Greg, you've taken us on a journey from the very, in a sense, the very personal, almost single person response to constant cajoling and persuading and explaining in that they can finally, at the start of the second series, without even being asked, they can then start to produce things which shows that they have re-engineered the way they think about things. Yeah. But you also have taken us to a place where you're talking about the large institutions are the ones that have to support that because it's a lot of effort. Yeah. This is not easy.
And I think large institutions, there's been mistakes, and mistakes are being made, but I think that's because they don't have necessarily the depth of knowledge to be able to not make the mistakes in the first place. And I think the greater the depth of your workforce, you will stop making mistakes.
We'll pick up on that if we get some time at the end. So I come to Divya because here you are that individual. You are the individual who has chosen to enter this industry. And in your particular case, you said to me, despite your own community regarding it as a crazy thing to do, and there are, of course, other communities which wouldn't even think it was an opportunity for them. What did that feel like? And I know you've got some thoughts about positive actions that can be taken.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'd like to draw on more of my personal experiences entering into the industry. When I first decided to enter the media landscape and the broadcasting industry, I'd say my parents were really supportive, but I did have knockbacks from a few members of my extended family who felt I could do something more viable, who thought working in media and broadcasting wasn't seen as a long-term career achievement, and couldn't quite understand why I wanted to get into a field like this. And for me, it wasn't, when I entered the industry, it wasn't about ticking a diversity box or anything like that. It was about becoming a great storyteller, and it was about doing a job which, when I look back on, I wanted to look back with sort of fond memories and knowing that I did something different with my career. Over the years, I'd say support has grown, and whilst people talk to me and tell me I have a cool job and a great job and I'm in a great place, I still get asked, but how did your parents let you do that? How did they support you? And I still find that question quite interesting, is because people from my community don't always see it as something. They sort of see it as something that the other person would do and not see themselves doing it, which I still find, after doing this for over a decade, I still find that those questions are very, very regular. I think I have seen some change, but still not enough change to sort of see more people from ethnic minority backgrounds coming through. But I also feel sometimes it might be more that as an industry we have to go to find those people, but also to find talent and nurture talent. I think that's a really, really important part and element of working in this space. And that's also one of the amazing things about working in these industries that we do work in. One of the things that's really helped me recently is I took part in the Helen North Achievement Programme with animated women. That was just brilliant in itself, because I came to a point in my career where I knew I needed to change direction, or needed to do something differently. I just didn't know how to do it. And having training like that just allowed me to step out of my zone and step out of my daily routine, which I did without even thinking. I'm sure we all do it. We all enter into our workspace and we just sit there in front of the computer, replying emails, sending emails, and that's all we do. Heading to the next meeting, we don't really stop to think about where we are in our career and where we're going and what our next step is and what we're trying to move on to next. And I found doing that has given me confidence to be able to project myself, to create an impact and to really navigate my direction.
How do you feel about the fact that I asked you to come and speak here today? How do you feel about being a representative of people of colour? And how do you feel about that in your workplace? Does that make you feel good, or does it actually make you feel frustrated?
I'd say when I was asked, I was unsure. I wasn't sure how to take it. I wasn't sure, mainly because I wasn't sure exactly what the objective was. So I wanted to find out what was... You're
wise to always be unsure of my motives. It's usually to get someone to do a huge favour for nothing.
And so I wanted to know what exactly we were going to discuss and what would be the purpose of this. But I'd also say I was curious. I wanted to know what the discussion was about. I wanted to meet everybody else on the panel and everybody else here too. I just think if I was to shy away from that space, that wouldn't have been the right decision to have taken. And I feel if I have a voice to represent something, I think I should take that opportunity.
Yes. But it is a tricky area. It's a very tricky area. So let's come to we've looked at some creative, that's come from teams that are built around drawing in people who rarely work in children's media and have been brought in especially for their ethnic expertise and the place they have in society. We now look at another and a newer animation, and it's the gestation of that, the people engaged in the gestation, which I think you want to talk about, Emma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so first of all, I feel a bit sad that we're even talking about this, because I just feel like, is this a thing? I suppose it is a thing, right? Which is why we've got reports, and same with being a woman or being mixed race or whatever. But when I moved to Manchester to work on Nella the Princess Night for Nickelodeon, and I remember asking the question to see the creative, can I see what this show is, before I moved my whole family to Manchester. And when I saw the Bible and I saw she was a mixed race princess who kicked butt, basically, I was like, this is amazing. She's mixed race, and she's doing all this cool stuff like blurring the lines between the gender stereotypes. So hence why I'm in Manchester. So let's have a quick look at Nella before we talk about her, so everybody can put it in context.
How seasonal, thank you.
Yes, nice choice. Yes, so the evolution of how Nella looks the way she does and her parents very much came from the process of design and just seeing what would work. And it was interesting actually when we got to Dad's design, because Nella, of course, she's the hero character. We spent months and months and months getting her right. And of course you think about what her parents looked like in that process, but actually nailing what her mum and dad were going to look like came after the fact. And I think in the showrunner, Robert Vargas, who's an amazing showrunner, he always felt like Dad would be black, and he would be very obviously black. He would have afro hair. This is what he would be. It was never really again, for us, it wasn't a thing, for me and Robert. But Robert sent it over to Nickelodeon. We all sort of held our breath a little bit, because what were they, was it too on the nose? Because sometimes a lot of the design, when we go down the route of diversity, it's like, let's sort of dip our toe, but not necessarily go all the way. And we decided to go all the way, and Nickelodeon were there with us and thought it was a great design and it made sense. And the idea of Nella being mixed race is very much to sort of, we talk about being good for business. It was fantastic for the show in so many ways, because suddenly lots of children who were mixed race, and we're talking about all different types of ethnicity. Myself, I'm half Sri Lankan and half English. There's many people that have exactly the same skin tone as me that have different variations of that. So all of those children who saw Nella thought they were Nella, which was amazing. So all of a sudden we were getting fan mails and tweets. So there's a tweet that I've pulled out here. It's too small for me to read. But basically, it was somebody tweeting to say, finally my daughter sees a character that looks like her. And that is, that's amazing. That's why we all do what we do, right? Because we tell stories and we want kids to be engaged and feel like the characters are aspirational. And when you see yourself represented on screen like that, that's a real moment. So that was fantastic. And we got quite a lot of that with Nella. So that was that's just one example. And then mirroring that in terms of crew, so myself and Robert and our director, Gilly, who's the creator of Zack and Quack, if anyone knows Gilly, he's fab as well. So the three of us are all non-white. It's like a really weird thing to say, isn't it? How do you say... Greg and I were talking on the phone. I was like, how do you say we're all non-white? That's a bit of a strange way to put it, but anyway. And we worked quite hard in making sure that we had the voices behind Nella were reflective of what Nella was and what her family were and what the stories were. And Robert and I worked really hard to try and make sure that the people that we were hiring to work on the show, that they were all of some diversity. But of course you hire the best people for the jobs, of course you do. But it's always definitely, it was a consideration for us. And we crewed the whole studio up to work on Nella, so we had a great opportunity to really build that structure in terms of diversity, because we had to find absolutely everybody to make the show. So yeah.
Thank you, and that, of course, that is a fantastic opportunity if you're building a team from scratch. You can take certain decisions about it, and presumably, Harriet, that sort of decision making is perfect for your non-tick boxes, as it were.
You know, when you're representing characters on screen, we're sort of, how is that authentic? How are you going to be able to tell that story? You know, so we look at that as well, and that comes under, you know, standard B, which is the voices behind the story. Yeah.
Everyone, pretty much, one way or another, though, has touched on the sensitivity of the topic. I mean, I agree, we really shouldn't need to talk about this. We should be in the bar having our drink. But I'm going to hold you here for a little bit longer, because we do need to talk about it. The report shows we need to talk about it, and that work is needed. And I also personally find the social inclusion bit of the report really interesting, because, I mean, I'm a person who entered the children's industry from, you know, relatively working class background, but that was in the 1970s when it was possible, and I think it's actually less easy now than it was then. I certainly spoke to Angela Ferreira, who now runs Lenny Henry's company, for example, and she and I sat down over a lunch and said, when we entered the BBC, and in the 10 years that followed that, we think that actually life was more exciting in terms of diversity than it is now, because there are swathes of people who don't even consider the media as their business. I mean, yeah. You've done very specific things about that.
So, because I think the socio-economic issue seems to amplify a lot of the issues that the industry might be facing. I'm actually doing quite a lot of work away from screen media, but looking at music and music education. And the notion that Pierre Bourdois talks about something called habitus. And that is what is within a family's makeup that will encourage a child to be creative or aspire to be something. And when you look around the country in terms of music or the creative arts, if there isn't a parent pushing, creating intrinsic motivation, then there's massive issues with participation in the creative sector, and it's a very, very, very fundamental issue, because it takes us right back to our 3-, 4-, 5-year-olds and what they're seeing, but also their parents' perception of the media industry.
But on the principle, if you can't see it, you can't be it. Do we think that social media, that YouTube in particular is now providing a place where people are seeing things which they wouldn't perhaps have seen because media companies 20 years ago would not thought of making them?
Well, I think the short answer to that is yes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, as well as the productions like the ones you've heard about this evening.
Thank goodness for YouTube. It's saving us all.
I think there is a really important message around accessibility, and I think it's Gina Davis, isn't it? See it, and you can be it, and that was about the gender issue, but this is about everything. And I think diversity is all of the characteristics, as you were saying, Harriet. I didn't talk about disability or sexuality, or intersectionality, and there are really, really important statistics behind all of that. So yeah, I think there is more visibility now and accessibility, but I also think some of the structural things that have happened since the 70s and 80s are real barriers to entry. So I think whilst companies need to be really doing stuff from a leadership point of view, from a content point of view, policymakers need to make it part of policy. I also think the industry collectively needs to get together, and they are. And I do need to say in a 3-minute presentation that the other 20 minutes would have been, there's lots happening from the Helen North Achieve programme that animated women do brilliantly, through to the Access VFX, which goes out to reach out to young people who wouldn't have thought of careers in animation or VFX. But if we work 24/7 on some of these issues, all of us couldn't achieve what we need to do. So it needs to be the whole, it needs to be everyone getting behind this wheel.
So if you had, we've got a couple of minutes left, because I'm still not going to let you go to the bar till we've finished this. We're going to solve this problem before we go to the bar. If we had, from all of you, one thing that you would like to see happen soon, to move things along, and I'm going to start with you as a maker, as someone who's created pretty successfully and relatively happy with the process. Is there one thing that could improve that?
I mean, for me, it will always go back to what we're talking about, like going back into schools and starting at the source. For me, I talk about this a lot. I do Inspiring the Future, which is a organisation where you sign up, you put your postcode in, and then local schools and colleges contact you, and I go in and speak to kids who are from backgrounds where their parents just have no idea about these jobs, or they're just not exposed to it in the same way, and go and say to them that making cartoons is a job, and it's a bloody great one, and there's all these jobs that exist within it. And there's just not enough of that. You are greenlit on a Friday, and on a Monday you go, and you've got your budget, and you've got no time and no money, and you've just got to make it. And as content creators, we're always in that. Well, I find myself in that space where I'm like, well, but I don't really have enough money, but I really want to train up people, and I want, you're always in that space. So I think, for me, it's always comes back to everybody getting together, and every single person here should sign up to that initiative, and we should all be thinking about feeding the machine from the bottom.
And of course, one of the machines we can feed is screen skills, and through the Skills Council,
yes,
and
exactly.
we should. And I've been talking to Tom today about holding another session like the one the forum they held today at CMC, where 40% of the people who come to CMC are actually in animation. Katie, your company's doing rather well. I'm going to ask you about your one thing, but do you find across all of the territories that it's doing that well? Is it tougher, for example, because you've got an Asian studio, haven't you? Presumably a bit tougher there.
We recently purchased a Bali studio that was originally an outsource animation studio for our 3D studios. So, yeah, we recently took Bali on board. It is a completely different dynamic, and it's very new. We only welcomed it to the 9-story family about, I think, 7 months ago. So we are in that transitional phase of understanding what the specific barriers and obstacles are within that particular studio.
So what would be your one thing? Do you have a one thing?
Yes, would be to ban educational snobbery. There you go.
Educational snobbery.
Ban it. Yeah.
So I took my old school tie off.
Yes. I think Kate alluded to it in the report, actually, was around secondary education, and also around, if I could ask the industry to do one thing, it would be to open doors a little bit more to people who haven't been to university. Yeah. And that would be the one thing, because the fact that somebody has managed to go to uni doesn't mean that they are going to be a better designer or a better animator.
No, they're just good at getting into debt.
Well, they've gone through the academia, obviously, and they are going to need additional support in studio, but we should be committed to offering that support.
Harriet, you're pensive. Is there one thing?
I mean, I think, you know, some of the most exciting applications we've had through are where, you know, production companies have, you know, are just allowing people to tell their own stories who haven't had a chance to tell those stories before. And it's the most sort of exciting content that, and it's different to what we've been having for the last, you know, however many years. So I'd say, yeah, just allowing people to tell their own stories and supporting them in doing that would be my one.
And Divya, I mean, where you work is still presumably, you know, you're not surrounded by people who are like yourself, as it were.
Actually, I think my team's quite fair in that space. I'd say we have people from India, from Turkey, from various places, and we do that, I think, a lot with our interns as well. We always see a diverse set of people coming in for our interns every year. So I think my team is probably a little bit more fairer in that. But I'd say if there's one thing I'd want to see more, it'd probably be more articulate screen representation. I think it's great to see people from ethnic minorities being represented on TV and in film, but sometimes it might be nice to see a bit more of a flair of what it's like being in that culture. Or maybe we see more of a home environment, maybe we see more festivals, foods, those sorts of things that are representative of people from those backgrounds.
Things that connect us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is what I'd like to see more of.
That's an interesting point. Greg?
And so I'm just actually going to pick up on two things that have just been said. So, Emma, I think the days of letter writing to politicians is over, and I think whatever happens, and I think the industry is just going to go. We're just going to go out there and we're going to go into schools and we're going to do this ourselves, because if we don't, the politicians won't catch up with us. And I think the other aspect of that, and I think this comes back to what you're alluding to, is kind of in the young people who are the future of our industry, getting them to, whether it's professional or just for enjoyment, celebrating the creativity of their own cultures. Because it's the only way that we will preserve them, to put them on the screen. Because there's always a danger that in trying to put a pipeline together that it's all about profit or it's all about that career structure. We work in a wonderful business that celebrates culture, and we're not bad at actually celebrating the wider world, but we just need to tell our young people to do more of it, and that being creative is one way to do that, and we've just got to get into the schools. It's the only way to change it.
Well, I think we've managed to move things along a little bit. I hope we've managed to move things. Have you got one? You've got a one thing, have you?
No, I have. Yes, I have, Greg. I was going to cheat. Okay, I was going to say that, to use the overused expression, talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. Yeah. It's actually to say there isn't one thing. There isn't one thing. Wherever there's a block in opportunity, whether that's, you know, and for any of the reasons of diversity, characteristics, and all those clunky old terms, unblock it, find a way to do it. And that's why I think we all have to be on it, whether it's unconscious bias training or getting into schools or sorting out, you know, the gatekeepers for access to visibly different content. That's what we've got to do. There isn't one solution. It's the whole schmear.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you join me in thanking our entire panel for a very interesting conversation? Thank you.